Good evening. I'm Toby Jurovics, curator of photography, and I'd like to welcome you to the Smithsonian American Art Museum and thank you for coming out on this appropriately soggy day. As some of you may or may not know, the pond itself dried up several years after John photographed it, and I'm sure today it's at least ankle deep again. Before we go much further, if I could ask everybody to turn off their phones or anything else that might ring or buzz. We're here tonight to mark two events. The first is the first exhibition of John's portfolio of the pond. The first time all of these images have ever been exhibited together in the museum, and also its reissue by Aperture on the 25th anniversary of its first publication. After the show was installed, our preparator came to me and he said, I went to look for a copy of this book on eBay. It costs about as much as a used Honda Civic. And I said, rest assured, there are more on their way. So it's a real service that Aperture has reprinted this and made it available to the public again. It also, though, speaks to the iconic status that the pond has attained. Now, at first glance, for those of you who have seen the show or are familiar with the book, which we'll look at shortly, it seems like an unusual suspect. As I note in my introduction, they're not easy photographs to understand, nor is their subject particularly likable. Flipping through the book or walking through the exhibition, we subconsciously worry that we might ruin our shoes and all of the muck, and you kind of try to make sure you've had your tetanus shot updated. It's a little kind of sharp out there. But nobody has ever accused John of doing things the easy way, and by the time we reach the end of our journey, he's carefully convinced us that there is something worth looking at no matter where we might find ourselves, that there is elegance and revelation to be discovered around every corner. The pond, in fact, reflects John's generosity as an artist. It is not simply about a place, but about how we discover it. More specifically, about how John discovered it. From frame to frame, we duck and weave our way through the branches at his side, pause to turn and look above at a flock of birds wheeling overhead. Our focus shifts and we quickly find a rock at our feet that's just about to trip us. And it's like we're next to him as he's exposing each and every frame. So reading the pond engages us as deeply and as thoughtfully as that walk in the woods might have. Now, so we can turn the slide on here. The pond itself did not arise fully formed from the muck. It draws on a tradition of narrative landscape, one that photography is particularly adept at. In literature, John says, landscape inevitably becomes the setting, the background to the story. It isn't easy to do with language, but it is a natural photographic mode. In photography, it's the one place landscape can be the primary subject. So there are a few images that John and I discussed that we wanted to show and for you to keep in mind as we go along. This is a photograph by George Barnard, made in 1864, 1866, from photographic views of Sherman's campaign following the Army of Tennessee as it made its way towards Atlanta. A.J. Russell, two photographs from the Great West Illustrated, published in 1869, which followed the construction of the Union Pacific Railroad from Omaha to Promontory, a narrative quite literally taking us right down the tracks. And then, for those of us that remember seeing the O'Sullivan Show this spring, I won't ask for a show of hands, but I know you were all there. Timothy O'Sullivan's work for the King and Wheeler surveys, and as John and I were working on this show, I'd spent a lot of time looking at Apache Lake, and I said, it's the same picture, isn't it? And the first person who can identify this in the pond will win a prize at the end of the evening. This dialogue, this format of the extended photographic narrative, returned to prominence again in the 1970s in the work of Lee Friedlander. Two images seen here from the American Monument, which is rather both comical and grim assessment of the American social landscape between Watergate, the end of the Vietnam War, and the bicentennial. The work of Robert Adams, these are two works from the New West, which had Bob kind of grabbing us by the collar and shaking us and trying to point out what had happened to this landscape west of the Missouri River in the 100 years since O'Sullivan and Russell had been there. And work of Louis Baltz. And this is from a series called The New Industrial Parks in Irvine, California. There's 52 photographs of the side of prefabricated concrete buildings, kind of pointing out the monotony of the world to which we had condemned ourselves. So, well, there's nowhere to go but up from here. So before John joins me on stage, I'd like to thank the generous benefactors who donated the original edition of The Pond to the museum, as well as Michael Abrams, who added additional prints represented by the second edition to complete our portfolio. And I'd also like to thank Mr. Abrams, Eddie Lincoln, and Stephen Stein for their support of tonight's event. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming John Gossage.
Hey, now there's a cheery landscape. I'd like to welcome all of you fans of small bodies of water tonight. So I get off easy. You just ask me questions, right?
Is there a question?
Oh.
Before we actually go too far along, why don't we talk about what we're looking at?
Yeah, what we decided, Toby and I decided, we would have behind us run through basically every page, cover, front to back, of the new edition of The Pond. And it'll sort of run on a loop, and it'll run until you're all so tired of it that you demand we turn it off. So just to have a general sense of the book in this current edition, but also the fact that my initial idea of all of this was for this to be a book. As a matter of fact, I was showing at Leo Castelli Gallery at the time when I did this, and Mr. Castelli was actually quite surprised that I actually did not want to do a show from this. At that point in time, what happened with when you did books, they often were seen as catalogs of exhibitions. And one of the things that I was particularly insistent on is I wanted the book to function as the original. Not that it precluded a show, but it was a point that had to be made at that point in time, or at least I felt it did. So this really is it's the first time I've ever seen them all together on gallery walls. So it's quite a revelation for me too.
Well, now, you designed the book yourself.
With my friend Gabriella Francesca Goetz in Berlin, yeah.
And can you talk a little bit about the cover? Now, this was the first book that Aperture published that didn't have an image on it on the cover. There is, if you get far enough along, curious enough, or you spill something on it, that's usually what happens. There's a photograph hidden there.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interested me is that in this design, it's so emphatic. It's almost like it's kind of yelling at you, the pond. And then you open it, and it's a set of rather quiet and subtle landscapes. What were your thoughts on sort of this dichotomy between that?
Well, the concept, I had the idea in my head before it. I wanted to cover pastoral violence. And I emphatically did not want a picture on the cover. And this was the days before computer design too. So actually what I did, I found them the other day too. I used press type. Mm-hmm. And with a font similar to this, and sort of laid it out. And then I photographed it because there was no press type big enough. Like, I made numerous prints that were bigger and bigger till I could figure out how long the dust jacket had to be. And it was a very, baling wire and string kind of design. And Gabriella, who was at that point a design student in Berlin, who now has her own design workshop and is the head professor at Kassel, Germany, of the whole design department, helped me walk through all those intricacies. But I didn't want one picture singled out as the key picture, because it is a narrative. And if you make too much of a point of a single image in a narrative from the outset, everything revolves around that.
Try to figure out where that's supposed to fit in.
Yeah, and it becomes the fulcrum of everything. The title was enough. The title, you're going to look for a pond.
You hope. I mean, you've given them enough of a hint.
Yeah, exactly.
Hope they get there. Well, let's actually skip ahead and talk about that a little bit. The pond.
Yeah.
In the coda to the book, which we'll get to eventually, is a reproduction of a page
From my copy of Thoreau's Walden.
with every word crossed out except the pond underlined in
Yeah.
the same. What did you see as the link between these two places, or why was that so important?
One easy thing is I came to Washington to go to a Ford Foundation-supported special school called Walden School. And you go to Walden School, you read The Pond, you read Thoreau, you know. So I'd obviously read the book, but that wasn't the particularity of it. I wanted to do something with the East Coast landscape. A number of the sources you're showing, my friends, I mean, the thing that's hard to me, even for me to recapture, is back then. I mean, understand, you have I'm talking about two people here, almost. There's John Gossage 25 years ago, and my sense of what I was interested in and who I was, and that's lost certain givens, forgotten certain things, probably exaggerate others, and then there's me here now. But as I remember it, one of the things that most fascinated me about Thoreau's Walden is that he had obviously lived, it was the recounting of an experience. In other words, he had factual information. He lived this life. It's not proposed, at least, to be a work of fiction at all. So specifics led to a book that had literally become mythological, if you will, about American reality, its relationship to nature. I wanted to then take that myth, which was how, and make it factual again. Mm-hmm. And see what you found if you, quote, retraced the specificity of that book. What mythology then became something you could live with in, in these early, do you know when Walden was published?
I don't. I know someone in the audience who does. I just saw him.
I don't know how many years.
What year was it published? 1856. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So basically we're looking at, 130 years or something like that in between. The experience has changed. And it also wasn't the same story that I wanted to tell. I was confident that I would not be retelling the same story because of how things had changed.
And I think one thing that was actually pointed out by a friend who read the text in the catalog and in the exhibition and said, Walden wasn't a wilderness at the time, but I think it has in our sort of collective memory become this symbol of, it's couldn't be quoted more frequently by the Sierra Club and the Wilderness Society, and we have this idea of it as this sort of retreat from nature. Pardon me, retreat in nature, but we also, I don't know how many of us have been to Walden, but I think everybody has this idea in their head when you say it. one of the funny things about doing this, the first question everybody has is, well, so where's this pond? And everybody wants to know where it is.
Yeah. Actually, I had a couple of media requests to be taken out and given a tour of the pond. Guys, it's 25 years ago.
Did you think about just taking them to a different pond?
I was actually thinking about sort of filling something in Rock Creek next to my place with a hose and just sort of pointing to it. I mean, we didn't want to wander too far.
Photographs lie. And it's
well,
just smaller than I'd imagined.
Yeah, well, one again, it shows my craft and cleverness as a photographic artist. Yeah, before Photoshop.
One thing.
Just to what you were talking about, one thing I did do before, I did go to Walden. You know, I to the pond, not to the school. You know, and I reread the book, and sort of close read it. You know, knowing I was going to cite it to what, even in the archway that I did, I didn't want to make a fool of myself, and which I may have done anyway. But one of the things that was appealing to me that it was not so far into the wilderness, even back then. It was just at a distance that produced a change from the city, if you will. And that's one of the things I wanted to happen with this too. I didn't want something so far away that it was an experience of truly going into the world, going into the Shenandoah Forest or something. It was, being a New York boy, it sort of scared me anyway.
But you deliberately didn't pick a place that people would necessarily want to go to. That
Why?
I
had the tours already.
A package deal. You get a print and a tour with this. But it's not an easily appealing landscape. And there's a kind of an implied threat in some of the pictures, in the sort of broken tree
one of the things about this, I do find all these things I photographed, in the way I photographed them, to be beautiful. That's why, and that's a broad use of that word, but basically that's why photographers photograph. Restated a little, I found them valuable and worth saving and bringing home with me. That's why we make pictures.
Yeah.
What you're looking for yourself is some kind of educational honesty. I can live with this view from my experience lived up to this point. And those are the places that I'm looking for. Places that I can say, this is not a special case. This has to do with the life I've lived. I was born and partially raised on Staten Island, New York, which is the part of New York City that it has the most of this kind of area. Mm-hmm. We would play when I was a kid in these sort of areas that would later become shopping centers, but were sort of semi-swampy and everything. We'd have our little forts and all these things. Not that much different than the things that I saw go on around the pond. It was an experience that felt truthful to me and not overly romantic.
So it had this familiarity.
Yeah.
Is there, when we were talking yesterday, and you said one of the things about this project has been, you're both looking back at the work again, you're looking back at who you were 25 years ago. This is maybe an unfair question, but what did you learn as you were making the photographs for the book? Obviously, as you just said, there was you picked a place that you were certainly comfortable. How did that change between the beginning and the end of the project?
See, also, I think people should understand how the project, it's easy to look back and say, well, I had the project and I did the project. It didn't work like that at all. I went out to make some pictures. And I had more than an inkling that photographic books were actually the major leagues of the medium. Exhibitions were nice. I was with very good galleries, good museums were collecting my work. But my interest primarily was this understanding that I got from particularly sort of hanging around New York scene and people like Warhol and, you know, the photographers of the time, I mean, and the artists of the time, is the artist's responsibility was to make the work and then set the context for which the work would be seen. And photographic books seemed the absolute perfect medium for that. That's how I got involved with photography. I mean, I was a kind of, you know, young photographer that ran through the shows to the bookstore to see if there was a catalog. So what I was doing is I had the idea that I wanted to do a book. I had no idea what that book should be. It's not just the photographs of John Gossage, because that's a really retrograde conceptual framework. Authorship is, you know, so what, we're all somebody, and we all, you know. So I found some pictures, and I found this pond driving between the University of Maryland, where I was head of the graduate department of photography, and my home. And I had a particularly relaxed schedule at Maryland. I came in 1 day a week and taught pretty much.
Not too stressful.
Yeah, a class, and didn't have to go to faculty meetings. So, you know, what did I know? And I found this place, and I thought there were a lot of pictures that I could make around this. And as I started to make it, I started getting the concept. It's a pond. It's, you know, and I didn't even, it wasn't, the Walden thing didn't come into it at all. But I had a sort of handful of pictures, and I thought, this has possibilities. Now, let's see where it leads me. To this day, I'm the absolute inverse of a conceptualist. I mean, Louis Baltz, who's my dear friend and has been for many, many years, Louis gets a very specific concept and illustrates it. I mean, Louis and I came to, Louis is insistent where I'm expansive. Mm-hmm. In equal measure. That's why we get along so well. But it was, this taught me what was possible within a book. All of a sudden, it wasn't others' books, it was mine. What can I do? What can I add, too? You know, even at that point, a lot of books had been done. And you don't want to replicate other people's achievements. It's not particularly interesting, and it's not productive. And I had the also initial inclination. I wanted to be involved in all steps of the process, which was not common at the time.
Right.
But that seemed to be something I wanted to try to take on, even if I failed.
Now, one thing that we talked about, and you say that on the one hand you don't have this kind of rigorous sort of conceptual framework when you begin, but you said as you were making the trips for this book, you made sure you never made a picture from the same place twice, that there was this kind of effort to, that sort of each time you took the camera out, in essence was a new opportunity to kind of discover the same place again.
Yeah. I mean, at the base of it, I'm just trying to figure out a way to make good pictures. Yeah. You know, whatever works, you know, stand on one leg, fine, you know, like, what, and then the definition, because all of a sudden, the other thing, it was liberating because I was liberated from the medium, in a funny way. When in the 70s and 80s, photography was coming on big time. Everybody wanted to do something about photography. The museums were doing things. The field was being solidified. And you reacted inside the field. My pictures were showing up in group exhibitions on all sorts of different themes, and some, you know, history of photography things would be at the end of contemporary work, and it sort of was, you were connected with those concerns. One of the things about the book is it liberates you from that. All of a sudden, you're inventing the whole world in which these things exist. So it was liberating, but it's also terrifying. Now there are no rules. Now it's whatever works, and you have to be sure that it works. Mm-hmm. And how do you get, and I've always kept my own counsel on these things. I think that's important. I think it's not something you ask others about too much.
Well, one thing about doing this as a book and not as an exhibition is that it does give you that control. I mean, one of the things about seeing the show upstairs is that you can walk in from the last gallery and you can look at the entire thing backwards, and you might be halfway through before you figure that out, or it might not occur to you. how does that change? I mean, short of taking this and cutting it out of the binding, people have to look at this in the sequence that you intended.
I don't think one of the things I'm really against souvenirs, one way or the other. The show is a different experience. Was always should, as shows should be. I mean, the insistence on narrative. I mean, because what happens with books? How the book 101, photo book 101, very simple, simple layout too. Single picture, white page. You see this picture, assuming you're not thumbing from the back. People who thumb from the back get their hands slapped by me. But
so you really are controlling even about how you read the book.
oh yeah, but I'm not heavily armed, so I'm a humane. You see this picture? It passes into memory, and it affects how you see this picture. That's a cumulative effect. It means that this picture, all the way at the end, has a very, very different context for it than the ones at the start. And if you're going to do a book, you have to take that seriously, because it's going to happen. We rely on a literary model. It's not exactly ours. Books have been formulated this way because of narrative literature. You start at page 1, you read your way through the book. Photo books don't necessarily always demand that, but we fall back on it. And it's a very, very powerful directional force. So let's try to use it if you possibly can. I learned that from Walker Evans' American Photographs, which is the first book I ever saw that actually figured that out.
So what, we started by looking at a couple 19th century photographs, and I think that something that curators commonly do is we sit around in our office and stare at things and assume that artists spend as much time kind of going back through the canon and thinking about all of this, and this picture must be linked to this picture. And it was interesting. I was recently talking to Robert Adams about how influential O'Sullivan had been to him, and he said, I looked at those photographs once in a cardboard box in the Denver Public Library 40 years ago. I haven't seen them since.
Yeah.
How familiar were you with, we talked about the Apache Lake photograph by O'Sullivan and the Barnard. How conscious were you of these? Because there are these very strong kind of references.
Well, I'm different than a lot of photographers. I mean, when I was 14 and 15, instead of going to school a lot of days, I went through every picture in the Museum of Modern Art Permanent Collection. And I can remember them in order. Because I did
this later.
I did this trick for John Strakowski for a photograph he insisted was not in the collection. I told him what box it was in. Very happy about that. But I always thought that I needed to know the history of the medium that I was working in, which was not readily accessible when I was learning. And since I've helped a few people assemble some collections of photographs. So the O'Sullivan picture of the lake,
Apache Lake.
Apache Lake. I actually helped. Actually, the deal was with the Library of Congress, who had duplicates. And I traded a couple of my prints for O'Sullivan prints that my friend wanted to buy. He paid me for my photographs, and he got those. And then I got paid for the deal by owning that one picture of the rock and the cup.
This is the part where we turn the recording off, John. We don't show the ugly underbelly of these things all the time.
Yeah, I've forgotten how I did that. Yeah, but my sense is photography, even this kind of photography, nothing's particularly moving. One, I can't work with tripods. One of the givens, this is all hand camera. As soon as I set up a tripod, I can't figure out why I've set up the tripod and what I was looking at. So it's all instantaneous, one way or another. It hits me, and I say, get that. So the learning of the history is sort of like honing your instincts. But I don't think about any of it when I'm actually making the pictures, really. It just sort of happens, or it doesn't. I did like that the one picture I put in the pond that absolutely referenced O'Sullivan. I saw it and I knew what it referenced. I said, oh, it's Timothy O'Sullivan picture that's sitting on my wall. I'll take a picture of that, and I will find a way to get it into the book. And that was sort of the fun part of it.
And when we get there, just shout out if you're right. And this actually brings something up. 3 of the photographs.
Here it is. Yeah.
John,
Coke can.
Same
Coke can.
the
Yeah.
book, John. The previous photograph with the Ferris wheel. 3 of the photographs in the book were not made in Maryland.
Yeah. No, more than that.
More than that.
Yeah.
How many?
3 were made in Berlin. 1 was made in Long Island. Yeah, the other ones are in Maryland. One's in Chevy Chase, actually.
And I got it wrong, I guess, that it was the picture with the Ferris wheel. But you don't, in the first edition of the book, you never reveal this. And it's only in Jerry Badger's essay in this, the reprint. What was it about those pictures that you felt was so important that they had to be?
Well, I got a revelation about halfway through the project, which was, one, I was not interested in the documentary function.
Staten Island, right?
No, Long Island.
Well, okay. Now I win a book.
That I had a number of things from off of Queens Chapel Road, Queenstown, Maryland. Oh, by the way, total aside, has nothing to do. Queenstown Shopping Center had the most amazing thing when I was there. They had the soap opera cafe. And if you went in at lunch and got a sandwich, they would perform a ongoing soap opera live for you. It got me in the mood to make pictures. I mean, it was one of the most amazing little events. You just sat there with your mouth open. It has nothing to do with it, but the idea that, and it hit me. I can remember sitting there and getting, oh, my God, it's all fiction. It all is anyway. I mean, one picture in American Photographs by Walker Evans is made in Cuba, at least, if not more. It's the world in between the covers that matters. It has to be plausible. It has to function in the way that you want. And by the way, I left all that information out. My sense of the 2 editions particularly was the first edition, it was there to be an enigmatic presence. Sort of, good friend of mine, Bill Eggleston, and I were talking around this time a little earlier. Bill's work at the Museum of Modern Art was being reviled by everyone. And we sort of got this thing that we were basically making time bombs. That you just laid it out there and you put the timer on and it was going to explode on them one day. It was just going to sit there and lurk there until people got it. But that I was really happy for the book to just have this, be this presence and it worked. I mean, who knew? It just slowly built. This edition examines the book as well as being the book. There was, a different kind of essay in the original one that's taken out of this. There are 2 essays that examine the phenomenon, that basically look at the book's navel, if you will, which I didn't want in the first. I didn't want kind comments by esteemed friends. Now it's a time to be analytical about the book, although I do have the confidence that most of the people that get the book for the first time, will read the essay for an awfully long time, and they will get the book anyway until they read the essay. And maybe they'll never read the essay.
It does happen.
Yeah, it's shameful, isn't it? It's our school systems.
One of the things in looking at the other images that we showed, Robert Adams and Baltz, Lee Friedlander, and also Frank Golke and you really kind of reinvented the way photographs were printed in the 70s. That the language really changed. I think what most audiences were used to looking at was an Ansel Adams. You have a black and a white and this nice kind of we can find every zone, 1 through 10 represented in there, and even in photographers, let's say like Minor White or Paul Caponegro, who've been making landscape photographs after that, and you guys took that tonal range and kind of pressed it all towards this high end.
Well, the zone system is the most perverse system. I mean, it's basically, all it does is allow you, zone system is Ansel Adams systems for exposure, by the way. So you would get the most tone out of what the film gave you. What we were clearly about was not making operatic kind of prints. We were interested in reproducing experience. And there wasn't any technical rebellion as much as, I mean, Ansel's pictures don't look like anywhere anyone's ever been except the sets behind Metropolitan Opera. It wasn't real. We couldn't, it was the 70s. We wanted everything to be really real, man.
Your hair was longer too.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And that was something that Frank Golke recently said, that he said, I wanted to make pictures that looked like they were hard and bright and sharp because that's what we thought America looked like in the 70s.
Exactly. It was trying to find something translated to black and white for most of us that seemed authentic. And there were no rules for how one printed that. The sense was that there were no, one thing about the photography that exploded in the 70s was the sense that there were no rules that you had to apply anymore. Like the sons and daughters of Ansel Adams weren't the ones that hit prominence. It was everyone else that had that come before them. So, and for the first time, the serious look at history, too. So, I mean, people did look at Ansel, look at Edward Weston that led to Ansel and everything.
And what, at this historical moment, we're kind of approaching the end of gel and silver printing.
Yeah, probably.
It's whenever the paper runs out, which is 5 years. How does that make you feel, that this is something that's going to disappear within your lifetime as an artist?
Well, no, I feel I'm running out in about 5 years anyway.
So it's fine.
Screw it. No, I mean, one of the things that's actually interesting irony to me is that virtually the same day this came out officially, a book I did with Gerhard Steidl, 32-inch ruler map of Babylon, came out, which is my other Washington book on Colorama, where I live. And it's all digital color because that's what that project needed. It's really interesting to me. I shoot black and white film because I can get more out of that than I can get out of black and white digital. And for the first time, I always hated film color because to formulate a color film, you had to decide as a manufacturer on a fairly narrow color space, and it was never the way I saw things. It never seemed real. Now I can shoot raw files and process them to the way I see color. And it's not that one's replaced the other, it's added onto it. Which is, I really don't care about tools, I care about vision.
And when we were talking about this earlier, you also said that one of the things that's changed is that with digital printing, nothing's being made by hand anymore. Most artists aren't making their own prints. You're not, going in, if you or Bob or Lee go into a dark room with a negative and a piece of paper, you all come out with something within sort of the same range, but very different. And now, as we talked about, that in part because of the cost of the technologies and also their complexity, that people are relying on going to a service bureau, working with a printer. How does that
Well, I've always
change?
felt the job description is that I do everything. I've tried assistants and people want to do, internships. I never know what to do with them. Just sit and spot all my prints and get my dry cleaning. Right? I'm really, awful. I like them. I wind up liking them, so I can't do that stuff. I think the idea is, I'm lucky to this point that I actually can afford to have all big digital printer and everything, and I tweak everything. My digital prints don't look like other people's digital prints. I've never done well with labs. They're just sort of halfway there as far as I'm concerned. I'm probably the worst client a lab could ever have because it's never right. So yeah, I mean, I don't go there and, you know, abuse them and have them abuse me back. I mean,
Well, I'm going to ask one more question and open it up to the audience.
God, you've left out all the embarrassing ones, though, that we talked about.
You can ask me later. You drew a distinction between your work and Robert Adams, and particularly in the New West. You said that your work has no message for change. That you didn't have. I'm not quite sure I believe it.
I don't have any faith that contemporary art produces social change in a direct way. I mean, broadly, I mean, very broadly, too. Looking, the fact that an individual voice by a single individual and their view of the world can be heard in an unmitigated way in a medium in which they feel at least they can speak eloquently is a rare opportunity. I mean, I've had a wonderful life doing this. This is exceptional to be able to be allowed to do such a thing. But especially being in a town of really professional politics. I mean, I've seen what job description that is. I could never ever do it in my entire life. But it's a real profession unto it. To think this thing is going to make global warming go away seems more than absurd. It seems pathetic. I want to produce art, and the thrill that a viewer gets about seeing something that's revelatory to them, at least in a minor way, personally. It's a one-to-one thing. I'm not talking to groups or large groups of individuals. I'm talking to each viewer. That's the other thing about this. It's a lap medium. It's you and it. It's this distance. What can be more intimate than getting to sit in 2,000 people's laps? I mean, every photograph, by definition, is previous and elsewhere. That's what it is. You're not here, then you're not when the picture got made. That just implies that a certain trick is being pulled, that you're allowing to be pulled on you. You're a willing participant in this. The facts, I mean, to decide to be documentary is a conceit for me, because just the frame, well, what's over there? What's over there? And what's behind me? And if I record absolutely all of that, it actually is fairly boring. Generalized experience without a particular sensibility, and not being able to be present there, is a very sort of thin experience. What I want from a work of art is I want a feeling that I can stand there. Well, a photographic work of art, that's what it is. I can stand there, give myself over to the experience, and get a particular insight that I would not have had probably if I was standing there. What more can, I mean, I'm sure, how documentary are Dan Arvis's photographs of those people? They're absolutely specific, they're looking straight at you, and that moment was 125th of a second, and I've actually watched her photograph, and I saw the moment that she took of this woman. And I realized, oh, yeah, I saw it go by, and it was a flicker. It was an incredibly intense moment, I'm sure, in the picture. That's the kind of fiction. It's not the fiction that implies a lie. It's a fiction that describes that the experience you're getting is fleeting, transitory, at the same time permanent, and will be there when you go back again. It's not reality. in the normal way that we navigate it. I did not have to go to the pond for every picture when pictures that came in Berlin looked back at me and said, ah, that's perfect. That's an added dimension to this experience that's happening within the book. Nobody cares about the pond itself. I mean, it actually still is there. They built a metro over it, but it's still there. But it's not, I'm not making a case that this is a place that you should visit. That's why I didn't want to take, newspaper people there. It's not about that. It's not a site-specific piece. The whole concept of narrative landscape, seemed to me at least, I almost invented with this. So my sense that I should reiterate it to keep you moving along. We're moving from here to there. I mean, the book is about stepping off the pavement onto something, in this case, all you can say is, it isn't pavement. You take a walk, and you wind up back home. Very, very simple. The paths one were the things that I was walking on to take the pictures often, especially in this kind of, urban wilderness. There are lots of paths. They're well-trodden. And they seem to offer picture opportunities, and they offer the literature that I wanted to deal with in this. Walk the path, you get to something. Let's take a picture of that. Let's get on the path again, and we get to something else. It implies movement. Photography is a broad field. I'm an artist. Basically I show in galleries and museums, and I make books that are sold generally to people interested in contemporary art, contemporary photography. They're the journalistic, photographers who have a certain other belief of what they're doing and are very committed to doing. I'm not involved with that, so but it's, my sense is, my dear friend Robert Adams, who is very, very concerned about certain issues. He did a book recently about clear cutting of the forests, the ancient first cut forests in the Northwest and
Washington, Oregon.
Washington, Oregon. And he very much wanted that book to be a changing element directly in those specific issues. I guess I'm just more cynical about it. I live in this town. I've met over the years a lot of politicians, enough that in the first 20 years I never voted because I'd met them. I mellowed. I don't see it as, in the field I'm in, an engine of direct change. We as artists make objects of fascination. In other words, there's a sense that I would like, why I do a book or why there's a show 24. I want you to return to these things. They can be a touchstone for personal beliefs and personal actions in the political realm. I'm absolutely fine with that. That's an individual's right. That reaffirm, but it tends not to change your mind as much as reaffirm beliefs you already have. If we're really honest about it all. So we're sort of talking to the choir, if you will. It's a matter of intention, not a matter of effect. And if I intended things to change directly, I don't think I've ever made a decent photograph for that. I don't think I know how. I don't tend to like to go to places to photograph where people have automatic weapons. I've been in a couple of them, and it made me very comfortable. So it's just cowardice. But more to really answer, I just don't have a sense that we affect things that much in the field of still photography anymore. Television does. There is the examples of shooting a famine in Africa that produced an outpouring of aid, seeing the tsunami. that's where, if I wanted images to change things, I would be a television cameraman at this point. That's the greatest number of people, immediate reaction, action, reaction. I mean, it took me years to get this book out. And by the way, the first edition of the book was so popular that I did one book signing in New York where one person came.
I think we can get you 2 tonight, John.
Well, no, I did a second book signing, though, where at least 100 came in this, but Richard Avedon was sitting next to me signing books, and they took pity on me.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.